Okay, good morning everyone. Agot Moyed. How's everybody doing? So the Hashgacha had it that the Gemara that we learned yesterday was a Gemara that's really relevant to the Yom Tov of Sukkot. The Gemara said that one should try to live in Eretz Yisrael even in a city that's mostly Gentile and not live in Chutz La'aretz even if it's mostly Jewish. Because someone who lives in Eretz Yisrael, it's like he has a God. Yesterday and this morning, we explained how that applies to the mitzvah of Suka. Because in the Sukkah, one sits in the shade of HaKadosh Baruch Hu directly without any intermediary. And the explanation of the Gemara, that one who resides in Eretz Yisrael, it's as if he has a God, is because in Chutz La'aretz there are intermediaries. But in Eretz Yisrael you deal with HaKadosh Baruch Hu directly. Today we're going to speak about a very important topic. I pray that it's a mitzvah I should be zocheh to be mekayim, and that is the mitzvah of living in Eretz Yisrael. Does that apply bizman hazeh? Is that relevant bizman hazeh? No, it's not up yet. Let's see. Yeah, you see the Gemara? Okay. We'll try to go through some of the main opinions over here. And I think this is very relevant to the Yom Tov of Sukkot, as we spoke out by Shal Shudas yesterday, that the mitzvah of Sukkah is literally you're sitting in a microcosm of Eretz Yisrael. The Sukkah contains the borders of Eretz Yisrael. Sukkah is diras arai. Arai stands for Ashkelon, Rekem, Akoy, and the Yam. So we're going to speak today about the mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. As we know, those who live in Eretz Yisrael live long. Those who sit in the Sukkah are vouchsafed Arichas Yomim, Kol HaEzrach B'Yisrael. So let's try to delve a little bit into this mitzvah. The Mishnah said that one spouse could force the other spouse to go to Eretz Yisrael. Hakol malin le'Eretz Yisrael ve'in hakol moitzian. Now, the simple reading of the Mishnah is that the reason why one spouse could force the other spouse to go to Eretz Yisrael is because there's a mitzvah da'iraisa and a chiyuv to go to Eretz Yisrael. Therefore, one spouse could force the other spouse to go to Eretz Yisrael. I would point out that I personally would not learn the Mishnah this way, for two reasons. Number one, just because there's a mitzvah and a chiyuv to go to Eretz Yisrael, does that mean one spouse could force the other spouse to change their residence? After all, a mitzvah sa'aseh, only Bezdin could be koifin al mitzvah sa'aseh. Could a spouse force another spouse to fulfill a mitzvah sa'aseh? So maybe you say, well, apparently yes. But furthermore, the Mishnah continues, because the Mishnah says, Hakol malin li Yerushalayim. Everyone could force, one spouse could force another spouse to go to Yerushalayim. There's no mitzvah in the Torah to live in Yerushalayim. So just like there's no mitzvah in the Torah to live in Yerushalayim, and yet one spouse could force the other spouse to go to Yerushalayim, why would we not say the same thing, that maybe there's no mitzvah to live in Eretz Yisrael, but you could still, one spouse could force the other spouse. So this is what we would like to understand today. Because actually in the Gemara does say it's because of the mitzvah to live in Eretz Yisrael. Because the Gemara says, Hakol mal nasuyemai. What does Hakol mal come to include? The Gemara says it comes to include that you could force an Eved Ivri. And according to the Gersa, that includes Eved explicitly. What's it coming to exclude? That you could force a spouse to leave a nice home in Chutz La'aretz to a bad one in Eretz Yisrael. But what's Ein HaKol Moitzian? Ein HaKol Moitzian means if you have an Eved Kanani that runs from Chutz La'aretz to Eretz Yisrael, we say save him. We say sell him there. We say sell him there. Why? Vizil, and let him go. Mishum yeshivas Eretz Yisrael, because of the dwelling in Eretz Yisrael. Now, does that mean because of the mitzvah of living in Eretz Yisrael? How did you learn when we spoke about Eved Shabarach michutz la'aretz la'aretz? What kind of Eved is that talking about? Is that an Eved Ivri or is that an Eved Kanani? How did you understand that? presumably it's an Eved Kanani. Well, if it's an Eved Kanani, is he chayiv to live in Eretz Yisrael? He's chayiv in mitzvahs like a woman. L'chayra, if there's a mitzvah to live in Eretz Yisrael, an Eved Kanani would be chayiv to live in Eretz Yisrael. So that's what we would like to discuss today. Let's begin with the pasuk in Parshas Maseh. It says, "V'hayrashtem es haaretz," you will take possession, you will chase out of the land. You will drive out the inhabitants of the land. V'shaftem ba, ki lachem nasati es haaretz l'resh osaysa, because to you I gave the land to inherit. Says the Ramban on this pasuk. The Ramban says, in my opinion, this is a mitzvah saseh. They're commanded they should live in the land, and inherit it. It's given to them, and they should not be despised with the inheritance of God. If they would go and try to conquer Iraq or Eretz Ashur or Syria, or a different land, and settle there, that would be a direct violation of God's command. So we are being commanded, according to Ramban, with the mitzvah saseh, that you should settle Israel and inherit it, and not be despised with the inheritance of our forefathers. That which the Chacham go to great lengths to speak about, the mitzvah of living in Eretz Yisrael, v'sha'asur latzis men, and you're not to leave it. V'yadunu k'mayredes ha'isha she'ena roitz alas and balal Eretz Yisrael, and they consider a woman who doesn't want to go with her husband to Eretz Yisrael as rebellious. V'chein ha'ish. So all of these statements that speak about the great mitzvah to live in Eretz Yisrael, where does that come from? Bekan nitztavinu b'mitzvah hazu. Here, in this pasuk, we're commanded in this mitzvah. So, yesterday we discussed, are all these attributes of Eretz Yisrael, that it's like you have a God, and so on and so forth, is that connected to the mitzvah to live there, or are they separate ideas? The Ramban learns they are part and parcel of the mitzvah to live in Eretz Yisrael. All of the great accolades we say about someone who lives in Eretz Yisrael, it stems from this mitzvah. Ki ha'kasav azahi mitzvah saseh. V'yachsar mitzvah zum comes from, this mitzvah is repeated numerous times. For example, Boyu Reshu Haaretz. Okay? That's how the Ramban learns. The Ramban learns that it's a mitzvah, positive command to take possession of the land and live in it. Rashi learns V'hayrashtem es haaretz, chase out its inhabitants, then you will be successful in living in it. If you don't chase out its inhabitants, then you will not be able to live in it. Which is a very frightening and timely interpretation. Where according to Rashi, the Torah is saying, either chase out the inhabitants and you'll be successful in living there, or you could have them stay there, but you're going to be miserable in Eretz Yisrael. That's what we see in our times. But the Ramban says, no, in my opinion, my interpretation is correct, namely that this is the mitzvah to take possession of the land, a mitzvah d'oraisa of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. Now, the Ramban in the Sefer HaMitzvos counts this as a mitzvah. The fourth mitzvah in the Torah, shenitzavinu l'reshes haaretz, asher nasa nakel yisal avisin l'avim mitzvah Yaakov, v'loi na'azeh b'yadzu l'seinu, we should not forsake it, min ha'umais, don't forsake it to any other nation, oy l'shmama, or for desolation. But God said, "V'hayrashtem es haaretz, v'shavtem ba, ki lachem nasati es haaretz, l'resh esoisa, v'snachaltem es haaretz, asher nishbati l'avosechem." The problem, though, is the Rambam does not list the mitzvah of living in Eretz Yisrael as one of the 613 mitzvahs. Why not? Why does the Rambam not list it? So the Megillas Esther is one of the classic commentaries on the Sefer HaMitzvah, says, Nirali, ki mashalaymana harav, the reason why the Rambam did not count it, hu lefisha mitzvahs Yerushas ha'aretz v'yishivasa, loy nohaga rak b'mei Moshe v'Yoshua v'David. The mitzvah to live in the land only existed so long as we were still in the land, in the times of Moshe, Yeshua, and David. V'chozman shaloi golu me'artzam. And so long as we were not exiled. Avar achar shagolu me'artzam, but once we're exiled, ein mitzvah zunoi heges l'doiros ad eis bo yam Mashiach. The mitzvah would not apply for all generations until the Mashiach comes. Not only would the mitzvah not apply, but as we'll see this coming week, and I think it's a very short week for me, so I think we're going to have to do definitely tonight Kuf Yud Aleph Amud Aleph, because Wednesday night already is Yom Tif, right? Tuesday night is Hoshana Rabbah. It's going to be very hard. We have to at least hop in tonight. We'll see tonight, hopefully. Adarabah, Nitztavinu lefi ma she'amru b'soif Kesuvos. We were commanded, according to what we say on tonight's staff, Shaloi nimrod ba'umais, that we should not rebel against the nations of the world, la leches, to go, lichboish asar, to conquer the land, b'chazaka, v'hoichichai, and they proved it, mi pasuk, hishbati eschem b'nois Yerushalayim, which we darshan, that they, Shaloi yalu Yisroel b'choima. So, the Megillah Esther explains that the reason why the Rambam does not list mitzvah Yishuv Eretz Yisrael as one of the 613 mitzvahs is because it no longer applies. And by the way, once a mitzvah no longer applies, it was never one of the 613 mitzvahs. Because one of the famous rules of the Rambam in listing the 613 mitzvahs is only a mitzvah that will last l'doiros is one of the 613 mitzvahs. So since the command to live in Eretz Yisrael was only applicable in the times of Moshe, Yehoshua, and David, and no longer applicable once the Galus began, Adarabah, once the Galus began, we are adjured not to go back to Eretz Yisrael forcibly. So then, that's why the Rambam does not count it as one of the 613 mitzvahs. The Avnei Nezer rejects this. The Avnei Nezer, in Siman Taf Nun Daled, says, quotes the Megillah Esther, that the reason why the Rambam did not count it is because it's not noyeg in the time of the Galus. But the thing is, the Sifri writes that they cried because they were not able to mekayim the mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael in the Galus. I want to read to you the Sifri. Look over here, look where my icon is, in the paragraph above. Story with Rabbi Elazar ben Shamua and Rabbi Yochanan HaSandler. They were going to Netzivin, to Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, to learn Torah, and they reached Sayadan, and they remembered Eretz Yisrael, and they began to cry, and they tore their clothing, and they read the pasuk, V'yarashta oisam, v'yashavta ba'artzam. They came back to their place. They said, Shkula Eretz Yisrael, Yeshivas Eretz Yisrael, Keneged Kol HaMitzvos. By the way, in one of the piyutim on Sukkos, we say that Shkula Suka Keneged Kol HaMitzvos. And there's a question, why is Suka Shakal Keneged Kol HaMitzvos? Isn't that unusual? Why would Suka be equal to all 613 mitzvahs? We once said Suka is an aid for Talmud Torah. So just like Talmud Torah, Shakal, Keneged, Kol HaMitzvahs, Sukkah is. But now we could say, since sitting in the Sukkah is like living in Eretz Yisrael, and living in Eretz Yisrael, Shakal, Keneged, Kol HaMitzvahs, likewise is a Sukkah. But in any event, the Sifri clearly says, in the times of the Amoraim, the mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael applies, not like the way the Megillah Esther understands the Rambam. V'nei adavar baruch shabal Megillah Esther lo ra'a Sifri ba'atzei rak ma she'avia Ramban. Must be the Megillah Esther didn't see the Sifri, he just saw what the Ramban quoted. Because the Sifri brings the story, and there it says they came back, and even though they were learning Torah, so clearly the mitzvah applies. B'zman hazeh, even b'zman hazeh, shkula yeshivas Eretz Yisrael keneged kol ha-mitzvahs. So the question now is, why didn't the Rambam list living in Eretz Yisrael as one of the 613 mitzvahs? So the Avnei Nezer tries another approach. The Avnei Nezer says, in Mitzvah Lamed Gimel, the Ramban writes that there's a mitzvah of building the Aron and the Kapores as a mitzvah by itself. And the Megillas Esther explains why is building the Aron a mitzvah by itself? Because the Aron was nignaz, and it will be revealed la'asad lavai, and we'll never have to make another one. So therefore, the Avnei Nezer says this is not correct, because the Rambam counts the mitzvah of hacharim tacharimim, of destroying the zayin umais, and the loisasev loisachaya kol neshama. Why would there be a mitzvah to kill the zayin umais b'zman hazeh? They're not around. So the Rambam says, even though avad zichram, it's considered noiheg l'doiros, because if they would be around, we would have to destroy them. Well, for that reason, the Rambam should count building the Aron and the purest, because if it was lost, we would have to make another. Meaning, the Megillas Esther says, why didn't the Rambam count building the Aron? Because it's not Nogea. Because we'll just unearth it. We'll never build another. But that's not a good reason, because the Rambam counts destroying the zayin umais, because if they would be around, we'd have to destroy them. Likewise, if we would lose the Aron, we would have to build another. He should count building the Aron. So why didn't the Rambam count building the Aron, says Avnei Nezer? The reason is, based on what it says in the Sefer Mayan HaChachma, Siman Ayin Daled, because the tachlis of the Beis HaMikdash is for the Aron and the purest, like it says, "Va'asuli mikdash v'shachanti b'soicham." So since the tachlis of the Beis HaMikdash is for the Aron, and Chazal say the Shechina never went down l'mata me'asar tefachim, that's why the Aron is 9 tefachim and the purest was a tefach. By the way, we say the same thing by Suka, that the reason why a Suka has to be 10 tefachim tall is because so that the Shechina could descend upon it, because l'olam lo yarda Shechina lamata me'asara tefachim. We learn it out from the Aron. And we also learn out from Psukim, Midivrei Kabbalah, that Tachlis Beis HaMikdash was for the Aron and for the purest. Therefore, we're not going to count them as two separate mitzvahs. And since the Rambam already counted the mitzvah of building the Beis HaMikdash, so he doesn't have to count the mitzvah of making the Aron, because part of building, the whole purpose of building the Beis HaMikdash is for the Aron. So now we're learning a great principle, that the Rambam does not break down mitzvahs into separate mitzvahs. If the purpose of the Beis HaMikdash is for the Aron, the Rambam will count it all as one mitzvah. That's why the Rambam does not list separately the mitzvah of making the Aron. It's part of the mitzvah of building the Beis HaMikdash. That's why, says Avnei Nezer, the Rambam doesn't count the mitzvah of living in Eretz Yisroel, because it's part of a different mitzvah. What mitzvah is it part of? Says the Avnei Nezer, v'ze'atzmai nirali atam be'inyan yeshivas Eretz Yisrael, the mitzvahs hacharim tacharimim, hi kedei she'anachnu neishev ba'aretz. The purpose of, there's a mitzvah hacharim tacharimim, which is to destroy the nations of the world, meaning the 7 nations who are no longer existent. What's the purpose of that mitzvah? So that we can live in Eretz Yisrael, kedei she'anachnu neishev ba'aretz. Because Yehoshua sent Prag Matutin Misharoitza Lifnois Yifne Hagirgashi Amadu Panav Layasalai Klum. So the Rambam counts the mitzvah of Hacharim Tacharimim, like we mentioned earlier. Either no Sheva Amim, so we said earlier, if there would be, we would destroy them to live in Eretz Yisrael. Al Kain Loi Nimna Hacharim Tacharim Yishazil Shtayim. Therefore the Rambam doesn't count the mitzvah of Eretz Yisrael. Why? It's Nichlal in the mitzvah of Hacharim Tacharimim. The purpose of Hacharim Tachrimim is to live in Eretz Yisrael. So the same way, the purpose of the Mishkan is the Aron. So the Rambam doesn't count the Aron. He already counted building the Mishkan. So too, the purpose of destroying nations of the world is to live in Eretz Yisrael. So the Rambam doesn't have to count the mitzvah of living in Eretz Yisrael, because it's part of the mitzvah of destroying the nations of the world. So if I were to ask, is there a mitzvah to live in the land of Israel today according to the Rambam? The Megillah Esther would say no, it's done, it's over. It was only existed in the times of Moshe and Yeshua and David. And the Avnei Nezer says, of course there's a mitzvah to live in Eretz Yisrael according to the Rambam. V'haramban l'tamei, the Ramban counts living in Eretz Yisrael because the Ramban counts building the Mishkan and building the Aron separately. The Ramban counts, so the Ramban l'shitase counts them as separate mitzvahs. He counts building the Mishkan and building the Aron as separate mitzvahs. So likewise, he'll count destroying the nations of the world and living in Eretz Yisrael. But the Rambam, who only counts Hacharim Tachrimim, and he doesn't count V'asuli Mikdash, the Rambam who counts Hacharim Tachrimim, the Rambam who counts Hacharim Tachrimim, but he doesn't count V'asuli Mikdash, likewise, let me say that clearer. The Rambam who counts V'asuli Mikdash, but does not count building the Aron, likewise counts Hacharim Tachrimim, but does not count the mitzvah of living in Eretz Yisrael. So the Ramban, who counts the building the Mishkan and building the Aron separately, will count Hacharim Tachrimim and Yeshivas Eretz Yisrael separately. The Rambam, who only counts the mitzvah of building the Mishkan and not building the Aron, will also only count Hacharim Tachrimim, will not count the mitzvah of Yeshivas Eretz Yisrael. That's how the Avnei Nezer learns the opinion of the Rambam. The Rashbash, Shailas Uchuvas Rashbash, Siman Aleph. He quotes our Gemara Hakol Malin. He quotes the Brisa. He wants to go, she doesn't want to go, he could force her, she could force him. Where does this din come from that you could force? He says, V'nirli shatamu, because Yeshivas Eretz Yisrael is a mitzvah. We learn it from the pasuk V'yirishtem Oisav Yishavtem Ba. The Ramban learns it's a mitzvah. The Ramban learns it's the fourth mitzvah. And then he says anyone who lives in Eretz Yisrael is like he has a God. And all of these great attributes of Eretz Yisrael stem from this mitzvah. And says the Rashbash, my father, the Rashbatz, agrees to him. And even those who don't count it as a mitzvah d'oraisa, it's a mitzvah, and it would at least be d'Rabbanan, otherwise why could you force? And therefore, they were very machmer b'din ha'aliyah. Again, I would ask on this, there's no mitzvah d'oraisa to live in Yerushalayim. There's not even a mitzvah d'Rabbanan to live in Yerushalayim. And yet, one spouse could force the other. Why? Because of the great spiritual opportunities. So maybe, really, there is no mitzvah to live in Eretz Yisrael, but yet you could still force because of the great spiritual opportunities. But that's what the Rashbash says. Comes the Beis Halevi. And the Beis Halevi says, according to the Rambam, who does not count living in Eretz Yisrael as one of the mitzvahs, Mukhrach, it's clear, the Svirale, the Pasuk Zeh shall be rich much Adama, Kairak al Oisozman shall Akivosh. The mitzvah was only at the time they conquered it, and never again. So then if there's no mitzvah to live in Eretz Yisrael, according to the Rambam, why do Chazal speak at the great lengths of the greatness of living there? It's like you have a God. Says the Beis Halevi, look in the Megillah Esther. The great spiritual benefits of living in Eretz Yisrael are not because there's a mitzvah to live there. It's because there are many mitzvahs that are dependent on the land, and you can't do it unless you live there. But it's not a mitzvah to live there, l'dairos. It's only a mitzvah to live there in the times that they conquered it. Bisman hazeh, is there a mitzvah? Says the Beis Halevi, according to the Rambam, there's no mitzvah. The Rambam does not list it, there would be no mitzvah. The Gemara speaks at great length about the greatness of living in Israel. Sure, it's a great thing, because you could be Mekayim, Truma, Meiser, Shemitah, and all the other mitzvahs, Hatluyos, Ba'aretz. So the Beis Halevi sides with the Megillas Esther, that the Rambam didn't count it because it doesn't apply Bisman Hazeh. And the Avnei Nezer says, no, the Rambam didn't count it because it's included in the mitzvah of Hachareim Tacharimim, just like he didn't count building the Aron because that's included in the mitzvah of Asuli Mikdash. Let's see Taisus. Let's see, what does Taisus hold about this? Taisus says, Hu Omer Lalois. If the husband says to go up and she says, I'm not going. Says Taisus, Eino Noig Bisman Hazeh. A husband can't force a wife to go up Bisman Hazeh. The Ika Sakanas Drachim is dangerous. Does that indicate that there's a mitzvah to go up Bisman Hazeh? Or that there's no mitzvah? Meaning, what do you think Taisus holds? Does Taisus hold like the Ramban, that there's a Chiyuv D'Oraisa to go to Eretz Yisrael? Or does Taisus hold like the way the Rambam is learnt by the Avnei Nezer, that there's a Chiyuv D'Oraisa to go up Bisman Hazeh? Or does Taisus learn like the Shita of the Megillas Esther, that there's no mitzvah D'Oraisa, it's only in the times of Moshe, Yeshua, and David? Now, the fact that Tosfos says there's sakanas drachim, is that mamish sakanas nefashos? If it's mamish sakanas nefashos, then Tosfos could hold there's a chiyuv d'oraisa to live in Eretz Yisrael. But what could you do? You don't have to give up your life to live in Eretz Yisrael. Or maybe Tosfos holds like the Megillas Esther, that Bisman Hazeh there's no chiyuv d'oraisa to live in Eretz Yisrael. There's a big Iyun because you could be Mekayim mitzvahs there. And nowadays, because the roads are somewhat dangerous, even if it's not life-threatening, we're not going to require someone to go and we're not going to allow someone to force their spouse to go to Eretz Yisrael just for the spiritual benefits and the ability to fulfill mitzvahs when it's somewhat dangerous. What about what Rabbeinu Chaim says? Look at this. Says Tosfos, "V'haya Omer Rabbeinu Chaim, the achshav ein mitzvah lada b'Eretz Yisrael. Nowadays, there's no mitzvah to live in Eretz Yisrael. Ki yesh kama mitzvahs hatuyos b'Eretz. There are many mitzvahs dependent on the land. Shmita, Truma, Masar, v'kama oinshin, and many severe punishments. The ein anu yicholim lizar b'hem. We're not able to be careful. V'lamed aleim, and watch out for." So Rabbeinu Chaim seems to be saying, yes, maybe there's a mitzvah, but it doesn't apply because it's likely you're going to sin if you go to Eretz Yisrael because there's so many mitzvahs hatzuyos ba'aretz. This shita of Rabbeinu Chaim, is it going like the Ramban, or the way the Avnei Nezer learns Rambam, that there's be'ikar a chiyuv d'oraisa to live in Eretz Yisrael? You could argue if there's a chiyuv d'oraisa to live in Eretz Yisrael, you can't negate that because, well, there are other mitzvahs there, and you might not be careful, so you're going to be chayiv and oynesh. Understand? That's like saying, well, you don't have to put on tefillin bisman hazeh because you might fall asleep, so don't wear tefillin. It's a very severe thing to fall asleep or to not wear it b'kedusha. Don't wear tefillin because maybe something will happen. You won't be able to guard yourself. You won't be able to guard your body. You have a chiyuv to wear tefillin, and if you have a chiyuv, then you have to put it on and make sure you wear it b'kedusha. You can't excuse yourself because of you're concerned maybe you'll do an aveira. But if you say like the Megillas Esther, that bisman hazeh, there was never a chiyuv to live in Eretz Yisrael. It's just everyone agrees the way the Beis Halevi learned. Everyone agrees that there are great spiritual benefits living there. Then we could understand Rabbeinu Chaim that he's saying that if it's only because of the great spiritual benefits, there are also great spiritual pitfalls. So Sheva al Tasa, don't go there. And by the way, that's how the Beis Halevi learns. The Beis Halevi proves from Rabbeinu Chaim. He calls him Rabbeinu Chaim Kohen. Does Tosfos call it Chaim Kohen? No, Tosfos does not call him Rabbeinu Chaim Kohen. I was wondering where I got the Kohen from. The Beis Halevi calls him Rabbeinu Chaim Kohen. He says, he quotes Rabbeinu Chaim Kohen, "Shevzana ze ein mitzvah la'alois, diyesh kama mitzvah shekash l'kaimam kes mishum kovid hagalos." So the Beis Halevi basically says that in order to understand Rabbeinu Chaim Kohen, it's because Bizman Hazeh there is no chiyuv. Since there's no chiyuv, it's only of great spiritual benefit, but not at the expense of violating mitzvahs hatzuyas ba'aretz. By the way, likewise, the Maharit asks, V'davar temahu, it's a pele on the Rabbeinu Chaim Kohen. There are many mitzvahs you'll be able to do. Like leket, shikha, and peya, and maser, and peret, and oilois. And there are many punishments in Chutz La'aretz, like Arla applies in Chutz La'aretz and Klayim. So then, however you're being careful in Chutz La'aretz, you could do in Eretz Yisroel. And furthermore, Mitzvah Yeshiva Eretz Yisrael is a Chiv D'Oraisa. The Ramban quotes it, even Bizman Hazeh. And the Gemara will say, we'll see it hopefully tonight, if you walk 4 Amos in Eretz Yisrael, then you get Olam Haba. And if you're buried in Eretz Yisrael, it's like you're buried under the Mizbeach. So what's Rabbeinu Chaim Kohen saying? Don't we force? Nobody is choishesh for the shita of Rabbeinu Chaim, and the Tosfos Harosh leaves it out. But as we mentioned, the Beis Halevi learns the Pshan Rabbeinu Chaim Kohen is because he doesn't agree with the Ramban. Rabbeinu Chaim Kohen holds there is no Chiyav D'Oraisa to live in Eretz Yisrael. That was only, he would say, like the Megillas Esther learns the Rambam. That was only in times of Moshe, Yeshua, and David. Bizman Hazeh, there's no Chiyav to live there. There are great spiritual benefits, but that has to be counterbalanced by the pitfalls. Okay, that's what we saw in the Beis Halevi. Reb Shlomo Zalman says no. Reb Shlomo Zalman says Rabbeinu Chaim Kohen holds like the Ramban, that there is an absolute chiyuv to live in Eretz Yisrael today. But because of the spiritual harm, you should not take a chance. That's what Rabbeinu Chaim Kohen means. Are you allowed to blow a shofar on Rosh Hashanah that comes out on Shabbos? No, you might carry 4 amos. Wait a second. But you have a chiyuv to blow shofar, so make sure you don't carry. No. We are very afraid of sin. We're very careful of sin. The fear of sin might overweigh the opportunity to fulfill a great command. We see that by shofar. We don't do mitzvahs at the expense of possibly doing averos. So maybe Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach disagrees with the Beis Halevi. The fact that Rabbeinu Chaim Kohen is willing to forego mitzvahs yeshivas Eretz Yisrael does not mean Tosfos holds it's not a chiyuv. It could be a chiyuv, but the spiritual danger could outweigh it. He says, the questioner said the ikar mitzvahs yeshiv Eretz Yisrael, according to the Gemara, is only to Mekayim mitzvahs hatzuyos ba, and he wants to bring a raya from Tosfos. And Rav Shlomo Zalman says, no, it's not muchrach. Adarabba, from Reb Chaim Kohen, it's muchach, that even Bizman Hazeh, the mitzvah applies, the mitzvah rabbah of Yisroel applies. But he holds, since you cannot be zoyer b'kiyam ha-mitzvahs, Chalila to come to Eretz Yisrael and violate the chukim of Hashem and His Torahs to mekayim a mitzvah through an avera. That's the shiddur of Chaim Kohen. He disagrees with the Beis Halevi. He disagrees with the Maharit. In other words, you could have a great chiyuv and yet we will forgo it because of sort of the inevitability of violating an avera. By tefillin, it's reasonable to put on the tefillin and be careful. Let me change the batteries. By tefillin, it's reasonable to be put on tefillin and be careful. Not so by Eretz Yisrael. it is so hard to Mekayim mitzvahs atuyos ba'aretz that it's worthwhile to give up an absolute chiyuv. But, says Rav Shlomo Zalman, nice try. Don't use that today in 2024. 2024, it's not so hard. So even Reb Chaim Cohen would say that New York and Miami are good places to be. Like the Samar Rebbe said, if you have to be in the Golos, Miami Beach is not a bad place to be. But even Bizman Hazeh, you would have to go, says Reb Shlomo Zalman. He says, this would be similar to what he says in the beginning, that it's not noig bizman hazeh because of sakanas drachim. There the Torah is not that it's a weakened chiyuv of living in Eretz Yisrael. It's just you have an exemption. This is also an exemption. The way we understood it is, well, maybe that exemption was also, it was not an absolute sakana, so since it's only a minor sakana, maybe it would only override the Iyun of living in Eretz Yisrael, not the absolute chiyuv. So according to Rabbi Shlomo Zalman, Tosfos is not indicative that there is definitely a mitzvah to. Tosfos is not indicative that he doesn't hold that there is a mitzvah to live in Eretz Yisrael. 1 minute. Okay. Finally, let's see what Rav Moshe Feinstein has to say about this. Uvedvar sheiloscha im yesh mitzvah achshav ladaber Eretz Yisrael karamban oik Reb Chaim betoisus and Kesuvos de'eino mitzvah b'zman hazeh. So Rav Moshe seems to learn Reb Chaim Cohen, who holds it's not really a mitzvah. He says Rav Moshe neiroiv poskim sabri do mitzvah. Most poskim holds it is a mitzvah. Aval pashat she'ein zeh b'zman hazeh mitzvah chiyuvis she'al haguf. It's not a chiyuv on your guf. I have to wear tefillin. I have to sit in the sukkah the first night, and I have to go move. There's no such mitzvah. I have to go move. If there was, it would be prohibited to live in chutz la'aretz mishum she'over al aseh. It would be like, says Rav Moshe, is living in chutz la'aretz like wearing a four-cornered garment without tzitzis? No. It would be if it was a mitzvah chiyuvis. She'over al aseh k'may mi sheyalbish beged shel da'ad kanfois b'lei tzitzis sheyesh iser lilbosh k'dei shel yaver al aseh the tzitzis. If we would view living in chutz la'aretz, if there's a mitzvah chiyuvis on a Jew to live in Eretz Yisrael, then the same way there's an aveira to wear a four-cornered garment without tzitzis, there should be an aveira to live in chutz la'aretz. Why doesn't the Shulchan Aruch say Asur Lador b'New York, Asur Lador b'Chicago, Asur Lador b'Los Angeles, Asur Lador b'Miami? Why doesn't it say that? Because it's not Asur. It's not like tzitzis wearing a four-cornered garment. It's just if you live in Eretz Yisrael, you get a mitzvah, but you're not doing any avera living in chutz la'aretz. The only isser we ever find is if you live in Israel, you're not to leave. But it doesn't say anywhere it's asur to live in chutz la'aretz. Once you're there, you can't leave. If you live in America, you're not doing an avera. Amanas lishkem chutz la'aretz. V'gam kein havada enoi isser lav.
But it's still done lav edesalila.
Right. Again, that's an agadata. So maybe the pshat is because you're dealing with nobody's praising it. It doesn't say anywhere that, Kol ha'hoilech dal ramos b'Central Avenue muftach lo yishu ben olam haba, right? But correct, you for sure don't have that maila. It says Rav Moshe v'gam kein havadei enoi iser lav. It's not an iser lav. Im hoya iser gam la'anshe chutz la'aretz. Hoya leila Rambam loimer stam asur lishkem chutz la'aretz. Elam kein chazak b'Eretz Yisrael rav. Unless there's a big hunger. Masha darak liyosh Eretz Yisrael yesh iser. Al mitzad ho'asei eina chiyuvis. It's just if you live there, you're mekayim mitzvahs. Says Rav Moshe. So now we're saying that even the Ramban never said you have a mitzvah chiyuvis to live in Eretz Yisrael. It's just if you live there, you're mekayim a mitzvah. Vekivan she'ena mitzvah chiyuvis yesh vaday lehischashev b'chshasha Rabbeinu Chaim b'toisvis. you definitely have to be concerned whether you could be careful in the mitzvah satuyos ba'aretz. Friends, listen carefully. There are 3 ways to learn Tosfos. Rav Shlomo Zalman learns Tosfos. You're obligated to get up and go to Eretz Yisrael. If you don't, you're violating an Aveira. Comes Reb Chaim Cohen, he says, well, that might be the case, but I might be violating Averis if I go there. So as important as it is to go there, I can't go because I can't be actively violating an Avera. Now I'm not sure that Reb Shlomo Zalman would say it's an absolute mitzvah chiyuvis, although he seems to say it's an absolute mitzvah chiyuvis, but Reb Chaim Cohen would override that. The Beis Halevi learns, no, there is no mitzvah to live in Eretz Yisrael b'zman hazeh. It was over in the times of David. There's just a very big inyan to go there. Why? Because you could be mekayim mitzvah satuyos ba'aretz. Comes from Chaim Kohen, but nowadays that you can't be so careful, then you don't have to go anymore. Rav Moshe has a little bit of an in-between. Rav Moshe says, you're not mechuyev to go there. But if you live there, you're mekayim a mitzvah d'oraisa. But since I'm not obligated to go live there, therefore I need to be concerned with the opinion of Reb Chaim Kohen. Now, do you need to be concerned with the first opinion of Tosfos, that it's dangerous? Again, if it's an absolute mitzvah chiyuvis, maybe Rav Shlomo Zalman would still say, well look, it's dangerous, so you don't have to go. According to the Beis Halevi, that there is no mitzvah to live there per se, maybe you'd also have to be concerned for the danger. Would Rav Moshe say you have to be concerned for the danger? Maybe. Maybe. It is well known Rabbi Ovadia Yosef disagreed with this tshuva Rav Moshe. Rabbi Ovadia said, you gotta go. I have it over here, number 18. I wasn't going to do this. Let me see if I have the sheet in front of me. Yeah. Rav Ovadia quotes Rav Moshe, and Rav Ovadia says, no, Tmihani, it's a Mishnah Shlema, Kol Malin Ve'na Kol Metzion. And if there's no mitzvah chiyuvis, my kulei hai. Says Rav Ovadia, of course it's a mitzvah chiyuvis. Then why could a husband force his wife to go to Eretz Yisrael? According to Rav Moshe, it's only a mitzvah kiyumis. So then how could a husband force his wife? So I would defend Rav Moshe, say Rav Ovadia, well, living in Yerushalayim is not a chiyuvis and not a kiyumis, and the husband could still force her. The Rabbi Ovadia's conclusion is Choiv Gomer al Kol Mi Shechared L'Dvar Hashem Lalois Eretz Yisrael Uvefrat B'Zman Hazeh. Says Rabbi Ovadia, the Avnei Nezer shlugs me up because Avnei Nezer says like Reb Moshe, and he proves it from what we just said, because there's a din you could force to go up to Yerushalayim. So says Rabbi Ovadia, b'mechilas kvod Torasai, he forgot the Ramban in Parshas Maseh, that all the great benefits of living in Eretz Yisrael stem from the mitzvah of living there. Says Rabbi Ovadia, listen carefully. Likewise, the din that you could force your spouse to go to Yerushalayim is also because of the chiyuv d'oraisa to live in Eretz Yisrael. Since there's a chiyuv d'oraisa to live in Eretz Yisrael, Memela Yerushalayim has more kedusha than anywhere else in Eretz Yisrael, so it's a greater fulfillment of the chiyuv of living in Eretz Yisrael. In other words, he reads the Ramban that all the great attributes mentioned stem from the halacha of mitzvahs yishuv Eretz Yisrael. Anyway, I think Baruch Hashem, in short notice, we were able to we touched upon many of the very important elements of this halachic issue. Rav Moshe really I guess, is the greatest advocate for those who haven't made the move yet. But again, Rav Moshe concedes, according to most poskim, there definitely is a mitzvah. Rav Moshe learns it is not a mitzvah chiyuvis, which is a great chiddush, a very, very big chiddush. Rav Ovadia says, no, how could such a thing be? Then how could a husband force his wife? I'm not so convinced by Rav Ovadia's question. Again, I'm not saying, I'm afar tachas raglam, I'm just saying in the B'derech HaLimud, because the Megillas Esther said the Rambam holds there's no mitzvah to live in Eretz Yisrael b'zman hazeh, and yet the din of Hakol Ma'an le'Eretz Yisrael still applies because of the great attributes of living there. So that really would answer Rav Ovadia's question. And Rabbi Ovadia discusses that earlier on in this tshuva. And but at least for now, if you can't be in Eretz Yisrael, if you go into your Suka, you could have a little bit of a flavor for the mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. And do you think it's a coincidence that we should be learning about this on Sukkos? Nothing's coincidental. Okay, thank you very much, everyone. Agut Moed. I think we'll try to get together tonight around 9:30. Is that okay? Okay. Hatzlacha Rabba, bracha v'hatzlacha. Kol tov.
Thank you.
Thank you. Kol tov.